Hope you can hear me clearly. So, as Ibrahim mentioned, I have worked a lot in emerging technologies within IBM, and I did messaging. We looked into transactions, and with transactions, we looked at Internet of Things. I did that base for a few years. I looked at blockchain. Worked on blockchain for about 5 years. And then AI. And I always looked at AI as the missing third leg. So Internet of Things that gives you near real-time information on transactions and messages. Blockchain that gives you authenticity of that information, validates as a single version of truth. And then AI that automates. And I always started with the financial sector, right? Because that is where technology is very prevalent, touches people, whether it is on the retail or commercial side, and then it permeates into other places, right? So if you look at supply chain finance, there's a buyer and a seller, right? So, as I was preparing for this presentation, talking to a few of my friends within IBM Research and IBM Business Value Assessment and so forth, we started looking at this picture, right? And we said, if you go back, right, to 1993, when there was a bombing attack in Bishopsgate, London, and you saw tons and tons of paper flying around, and that kind of started the whole digital journey, digitizing paper. Then we look at 9/11. I come from New York. I worked there, and I saw this firsthand. And there was a huge impact on people. We kind of forgot, how people are critical to business. Cantor Fitzgerald lost 3/4 of their people in that single day. And it was very critical for them to even survive as a business, and they did. And then you look at COVID, right? Disruption of workplace. Suddenly, I remember I was in Brazil on February 13th, and we heard that US is shutting down borders. Took the flight Friday night, got here on Saturday morning, and my life changed. I live out of a suitcase, and next thing is, I'm talking to, first few months, nobody knew what we were going to do. But then we started getting adjusted to the hybrid world, right? And a lot of people are on WebEx right now listening to this presentation, and folks over here. But the key piece over here is we are looking at disruption one at a time, right? Paper to digital, people, workplace. But we need to start looking at things as a continuum of disruption, right? And how does this help? When you start thinking as a continuum, you are not looking at one incident at a time, preparing for it, maybe working through it, figuring out, and then you forget, right? If you come to New York, the only time you remember 9/11 is on 9/11, right? And it's a very somber day for all of us. I lost very good friends on that day. We were just attending funerals, but then, rest of the days, it's normal. So we have to look at disruption in a continuous process, right? We may not be able to predict the next one, but we will definitely learn from what we have seen in the last few years, right? So one of the things that we started looking at in IBM, and we have been doing this for many, many years, right? Focusing on AI, right? And so I mentioned Internet of Things, I mentioned blockchain, the third piece being AI, right? And if you look at this chart, right, so there have been some attempts on automation. If you look at robotic process automation, right, you saw physical parts of it in industries, right, in the industrial sector. Cars are getting painted with a robotic arm and so forth, right? But those tasks are very specific, right? And it is, literally augmenting a human being. Maybe there is a very good way of transferring from man to machine and machine back to man. If you go up, right, into the process automation place, same thing, right? So what was happening in the physical world started happening in the digital world. We started automating processes. But it is, it is either rules-based or task-based. And that's where we have stopped, right? And at IBM, we started looking at the next level, which is AI. So now with AI, things change. There is a machine, there is an algorithm making that judgment. So you cannot just stay with task-based and rules-based, but a judgment-based automation, right? Today, we have applications that we have written which are for human, and we are augmenting AI into that. In the future, we'll just start writing applications based on AI and augment human into that. Think of the reversal, right? But that is where we are. We need to go to that next level, which is bring cognitive. Right? So what do we see? We see areas which are hot, areas that are on the radar, and then there's a hype piece. So what you see right now, hot is machine learning. And I'll give you some examples as we go through this. Right? Technology is great. What is the use of the technology? And some things that we are working on. So machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, pretty hot, right? And we see lots and lots of work happening over there. There are small chatbots that work, as I mentioned, from a RPA or robotic process automation perspective, or simple things like, you go on a website and there's a bot that is waiting for you to answer some questions. But it is very, very simple and it's very specific, right? What we see a trend is, if you look at the process holistically, there is an orchestrator that can orchestrate different types of bots. So as you're going through the process, today what you're doing is very specific, right? I want to open an account, or I want to buy an airline ticket, and you get responses within that. And they're pretty good. But what is the next best task? So now that, you got a response on opening an account, and then, what type of account and so forth. But what is that next best task, and how can you orchestrate a bot before even that happens, right? That is where we are. Right? If you look at the second one on the radar, as I mentioned, cognitive RPA. So people are doing basic stuff on RPA, robotic process automation, digitizing tasks, augmenting human tasks, right? I'll go away from the digital world into physical world for a second. And during COVID, one of the biggest challenge was there was tremendous pressure on supply chain. People were just buying from home. What also happened on the other side was warehouses had very limited amount of people in there. You couldn't bring more than 50% people. And suddenly, if there was one positive COVID incident, the whole set was shut down, right? You had to take everybody out, quarantine them. So, if you look at FedEx, and this is a published article, FedEx brought in a robotic arm just for those envelopes. And you would think it's so simple, right? You pick an envelope, put it on the conveyor, off it goes. But many times those envelopes would be sideways. And that required human intervention, right? It was not picking and dropping, but it was picking up from the side. And this robotic arm learned how to imitate a human being as they looked at different types of envelopes and the way they were stacked. Once that first piece was done, the rest of the journey was easy, right, on the physical side. So that simple task, simple chatbot, simple automation is happening as we speak, right? But we have to go into the cognitive world, right? So cognitive RPA. In other words, not task-based, but judgment-based. What is that next best task? And then, we see the sophistication of chatbots, right, which is kind of on the hype side. We ourselves are working on some of those sophistication, but, we are looking a step beyond what is today, right? We also see, there's a lot of work happening on the intelligent process automation, and that is today, right? We have to do that today. So if you look at simple things like documentation, right? You take a document and process it, right? But the data is very structured, and the place where we are going is unstructured data. It's a combination of structured and unstructured data. And then how to intelligently process, right? Simple things, and there was a conversation I was having not too long ago, literally like 2-3 weeks ago, and it was around check processing, physical check, and my first question was, who writes physical checks? But they still happen, right? And the signature verification, etc., right? So that intelligent process automation is where we are using AI, using cognitive, but then if you look at it across the entire enterprise, and you will start to see more and more interaction of AI. For example, if you look at mission critical applications, healthcare, finance, right? Today mortgages, mission critical application, auto loan, mission critical application, SME lending or supply chain financing, all are mission critical, right? Uptime of that is very, very critical. So bringing AI into your DevSecOps, right, or DevOps, making sure this mission critical application not only has uptime, but whenever it goes down or whenever there is any glitch or tremendous pressure on the system, right, from suddenly, a huge inflow of requests, how do you dynamically allocate resources? And not only that, if there is anywhere any pressure on the system and people are working on it, how do you bring all the service tickets around this application so that, as multiple people are working on their piece, from a network guy to a hardware to operating system, whatnot, how do you create that holistic picture? That is what we are at, right? So we are looking from today getting intelligent process automation, which is cognitive automation, into enterprise performance. That next level. This, again, continuing on the trend, right? We looked around the world talking to, CEOs, CIOs, C-suite, and we see certain trends, right? So if you look at North America, it is kind of given that people will work in a hybrid environment for quite some time and maybe get used to it, work from anywhere, right? Most people will work off-site 3 to 5 days. IBM started remote working literally 20 years ago, right? And it was rocky in the beginning, but people got used to it. People got so used to it that nobody wanted to come to the office, right? And there are some, challenges in that whole piece, right? But what you'll see is 3 to 5 days, right? But also, we see tremendous investment in automation, right? And when I'm talking about automation, it is more in terms of not only just digitizing, but creating, using AI more to automate processes. Again, as I said, from moving away from rules-based and task-based to cognitive, right? In Europe, we see the same thing, physical to robotics. But then, if you look at the very last line in there, very cautious approach, right? Making sure that the data is anonymized, it is not misused, not misrepresented, right? A lot of work in terms of trustworthy AI, removing bias, removing drifts in whatever AI tells you, right? And then in Asia, this was very, very interesting piece, right? What we saw in Asia is, because of COVID, people started working from home. Their biggest problem was edge, security at the edge, because they were never designed for that. Nobody took a laptop home and started working, right? Very few people did, and the security was managed at that level. And now suddenly hundreds of thousands of people start working from home. Their critical piece was edge, security at the edge, right? And how to work through that. So as I was, my very first slide, right? COVID disruption is a workplace disruption, and suddenly everybody's got exposed, in Asia, for example, to edge, security at the edge, right? But if you start looking at everything from a continuous disruption, anything can happen at any time. Now you have a different view, right? People can suddenly, work from home. Can you be prepared? Or people have started working from home, 3 to 5 days in a week. Is your security at the home perfect, right? Or what can be the impact if there is a breach? Right? So making insights actionable, and I'm just making sure on my time. Uh, just to give you an idea, right? We, on the cognitive front, right, we started working on this piece about 3 years ago. So we had prepared a whole bunch of ML models. But then the idea was how to show you customer insight in their own data. And we started building what we call accelerators, right? So this is something we can do now, right? So we go to customer side, deploy our tools, and show them insight in their own data. And this took a couple of years, right? COVID has disrupted, but we do these things remote, or kind of remote hands and legs, right? Or hands and arms. And we started showing things, we started seeing trends, right? Life events. We started seeing offer affinities, client attrition, et cetera, right? And in different places, but this is more focused on financial sector. You see claims leakage within insurance industry, right? Claims processing, SME lending, right? So this is the insight that we got. And customers started saying, oh, we had no idea this was the insight coming out of our own data. Now make it actionable, right? What do I do with that? Great insight. So we, So we took that life event, for example, right? And we said, within life event, what can happen? So it starts with opening an account, and then, the most unsecured one is your credit card. If you look at it, right, the only thing, if you're in the US, the only thing you get in your mailbox is a pre-approved credit card. Hardly would you see a mail from your bank or any financial institution saying you have been pre-approved for a car loan or a pre-approval for a home, right? You never see that because there is no correlation to the data. And then as life goes on, right, when you start to buy a bigger home and so forth, we have been able to identify from the customer's data and then personalize the loan, right? And how do we do that? So basically, very first piece is client onboarding. It does not matter how, right? There is some event on which a client is onboarded, and this is on the retail banking side, right? So you onboard a client, you go through the whole process, 2 forms of ID, you validate that information. If there is anything that is uploaded and it's fuzzy, you reach out, we bring in robotics to help reaching out to the customer in the best way they want to respond, right? It can be email, it can be text, and so forth, right? But once you onboard, you give critical piece of information: your first name, last name, your date of birth, your gender, your street address. These 5 pieces of information, now we can relate to the data, right? So, for example, I can bring up that data and personalize it, and I can say, hey, if you are this age and if you are in this demography, you are probably ready to buy a house, your first home, right? Or if you have a home, right, family is growing, you are ready to buy a next home. So based on that 5 pieces of data and what we have seen in the insights, we can trigger these events. And when that happens, we can trigger a pre-approved proposal, right? So this is what we are doing, right? This is what we are working on, taking our customers into the cognitive journey, right? Making their insights actionable. And if you can do this, you can have a better relationship with your customer. And I'm focusing more on retail, on the banking side, but we do the same thing with insurance as well. And again, in the client onboarding process, right, it's the same thing, bringing, take critical pieces and bring AI into it. So validation, KYC, AML, onboarding, and the most important, right, if we can predict from our data client attrition, remedial processes can come through, right? So like I was saying, be prepared for a continuum of disruption. Same thing. If You can predict from the behavior when can a client leave your bank. You can take remedial processes, right? It may be as simple as just reaching out. The other piece is, right, on this mortgage, externalizing API. So one of the things that we are seeing a lot is these processes, we augment them with AI. We are not disrupting anybody's current process, but augmenting that with AI and machine learning. But then how do you externalize that? So for example, if somebody is now working with the bank on a mortgage, externalizing it to get them the best insurance. You suddenly become the lending tree. Get them the best insurance, right? Or the titles and whatnot, whatever the services are. And by the way, the same thing applies if you're doing auto loan, right? On SME lending, again, the same thing. We're taking the same pain processes, but augmenting that with AI and bridging the gap between front, middle, and back office. Insights that you get, make it actionable. Right? Sorry, I'm rushing through this. So here are some key points, right? As you start your cognitive journey, think through this, right? And whatever your existing process is, how do you bring AI into that, right? How do you take your data, insights in your data, and make it actionable? When you make it actionable, how do you, augment AI wherever there are humans involved? And it is seamless handover from man to machine and machine back to man. So if it gets complicated and you cannot, your bots cannot give that response, human beings can come in. It becomes seamless experience, right? It's not that keep on pressing 0, 0, 0, 0 till you get a person. And again, predicting the next, next event, the next best, right? What would be the next thing that they will look for? I'll stop here, and again, that's my contact. If you have any questions, you can definitely reach me on LinkedIn or email or whatnot.